She had been warned about Colt Dearing 3 times before she ever set foot on his land, and she had not listened to a single warning. The first came from the station master in Bitter Creek, Montana, a small man with tired eyes who looked at the address on her telegram and said, without being asked, "That ranch hasn't had a woman on it in 6 years. Not since his mother passed." He said it the way people say things they believe are useful but expect to be ignored. The second came from a rancher's wife at the Bitter Creek General Store, a broad-shouldered woman named Mrs. Calhoun, who stopped mid-sentence when she overheard where Vera was headed and spent the next 4 minutes telling her, in the patient tone of someone who had lived long enough to know what certain roads looked like from the end of them, that Colt Dearing had turned away 2 cooks, 1 housekeeper, and a woman his own uncle had sent from Billings with the specific intention of being a wife. None of them lasted 2 weeks. The third warning came from the driver who took her out in the wagon, a weathered man of few words, who, when they turned off the main road and he saw the gate with the D-bar brand on it, said only, "You sure?" And when she said yes, clicked his tongue at the horses and did not speak again for the rest of the ride. Vera Ashton was 28 years old. She had been a schoolteacher in Missouri for 4 years, a wife for 2 of them, and a widow for 1. She had sold everything that belonged to the life she'd had before. Not because she was running from it, but because there was nothing left in it worth staying for, and she had answered an advertisement in the Western Farmers Gazette, placed by a ranch in Bitter Creek County, looking for a woman to manage a household of 8 working men through the winter months. She was not looking for a new life. She was looking for a place quiet enough to figure out what remained of the old one. The wagon came over a rise, and she saw the Dearing Ranch spread out below in the late September afternoon, and even after 3 warnings, it was not what she expected. It was large, not ostentatious, nothing about it performed wealth, but the kind of large that came from sustained, serious work over a long time. The main house was 2 stories of solid timber. The barns looked like they'd been built to stand forever. The cattle she could see on the far hillside were healthy, and there were a lot of them. A man came out of the barn as the wagon pulled into the yard, and she knew before anyone told her that this was him. Colt Dearing was 41 years old, broad across the shoulders, dark-haired going gray at the temples, with the particular kind of face that told you it had been a long time since anyone had asked it to be pleasant, and it had stopped practicing. He looked at the wagon. He looked at Vera. He looked back at the wagon as if he was hoping she might have brought someone else along that he hadn't noticed. "Miss Ashton," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a confirmation, the same way you'd confirm a supply order had arrived. "Mr. Dearing," she said. He looked at her bag. "That all you brought?" "That's all I have," she said. Something moved across his face too fast to read. He told the driver where to stable the horse, picked up her bag before she could reach for it. Not gallantly, practically, the way a man picks up whatever is heaviest in a situation, and walked toward the house. She followed. The inside of the house was what the outside had promised. Well-built, clean in the functional way of places where the work that needed doing got done and nothing else did. No curtains on the kitchen windows. No rug by the door. The kind of house that had learned, over time, to need very little from anyone. "The room is at the back," he said, pointing. "Meals are at 6, 12, and 6. There are 8 men. They work hard and they eat more than you'd expect. Mrs. Calhoun did the cooking before her husband had his accident. I'll need you to figure out the rest of the household from what's here." A pause. "You can ask Teddy if you have questions. He's been here 14 years. He knows where things are." "Who's Teddy?" she asked. "My foreman." "Is there anything specific you'd like done differently than it was before?" He looked at her for a moment. He had very direct eyes, the kind that didn't wander while they were deciding something. "Just don't move things without telling me first," he said. "I know where everything is and I need to keep knowing that." "All right," she said. He walked out. She stood in the kitchen alone and looked around at it and thought, well. Then she put down her coat and got to work. The ranch hand named Teddy Pruitt turned out to be 53 years old, gap-toothed, and possessed of exactly the kind of dry humor that keeps men sane through long winters. He showed her where the flour was stored, and which hinges on the supply room door stuck, and which of the 8 men had food they couldn't eat on account of various ailments, all of this delivered in the same unhurried tone he'd have used to describe the weather. "What do they usually have for supper?" she asked. "Whatever was made," Teddy said. Mrs. Calhoun was a good cook. Before that was Eloise, and she was adequate. He thought about it. Before that was a long stretch of nothing in particular. Boss does eggs. He cooks? He cooks eggs, Teddy clarified. That's the full range of it. She made stew that first night. Simple, enough for 12 in case she'd misjudged the quantities, which she had in the other direction. There was almost none left. A young hand named Birch, who looked to be barely 20, ate 3 bowls and said ma'am, when he asked for each one with the sincerity of a man expressing genuine religious feeling. Colt Dearing ate at the far end of the table, same as the rest of them, and said nothing about the food. This was not, she would learn, unusual. He didn't say much about anything that wasn't the work. She did not expect conversation. She did not receive it. What she did receive, over the first 2 weeks, was a kind of sideways information. The way you learn a place, not from being told about it, but from moving through it. She learned that the ranch ran on a schedule so fixed, it was nearly liturgical. She learned that Colt Dearing was up before any of his men and out the door before she had coffee made. She learned that the dog, a gray cattle dog named June, who belonged nominally to no one and actually to everyone, had a particular spot by the kitchen fire she returned to each evening with the reliability of a tide. She also learned what Teddy hadn't told her, which was that the men were watching her, not unkindly. They were watching the way people watch something that might be permanent or might not be, reserving their attachment until the question resolved itself. Birch was the first to drop his guard. He was young enough not to have fully learned how to keep it up. He started leaving firewood inside the door without being asked, which was a small thing and not small at all. She had been there 12 days when she first spoke to Colt Dearing about something that wasn't practical. It was a Sunday evening. She had been in the habit of reading after supper in the main room by the fire, which she had established quietly and without asking permission, because the room was empty in the evenings, and there was a lamp, and she needed somewhere that wasn't the kitchen or her room. She had been there 3 evenings running before he appeared in the doorway. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her that first day, like a supply order, checking whether it had arrived correctly. "I need those 2 chairs moved to the other side of the room by Thursday," he said. "There's a feed supplier coming. We'll need space. I'll move them Wednesday night," she said. He nodded. He didn't leave immediately. He looked at the book in her hands. "What are you reading?" She showed him the spine, Letters of a Montana Homesteader, a woman's account of her first years on the plains. "Any good?" he said. "Yes," she said. "She writes about it the way people write about things they had to survive, so you believe her." He stood there another moment. She thought he was going to say something else. Instead, he looked at the fire, looked at her, and said, "Good night, Miss Ashton." "Good night, Mr. Dearing." He left. She read for another hour. And when she closed the book and went to her room, she thought, he almost sat down. She wasn't sure why that thought stayed with her. The chairs got moved Wednesday night. She moved them herself and did not mention it. Thursday came and went, and the feed supplier came and left, and the room was put back the way it was. On Thursday evening, Colt Dearing came into the main room at his usual hour, which was to say later than anyone else's, and he found the chairs back where they'd been. He stood looking at that for a moment. Then he went to his study and did his accounts. Friday evening, he came into the main room again. She was there with her book. He was there with what turned out to be a survey map of the North Quarter that he spread on the table nearest the fire because the light was better there. He did not explain this. She did not ask. They spent an hour in that room, her reading, him working on the map, and neither of them said anything until June got up and put her head on Vera's knee, which was a significant gesture from a dog who had never shown her particular affection before. Vera scratched behind her ears. "She doesn't do that," Colt said. "I gave her a piece of biscuit last week," Vera said. "She's been reconsidering me ever since." Something happened on the edge of his face. Not quite a smile, the near neighborhood of one. "Smart dog," he said. "Smart dog," she agreed. He went back to his map. She went back to her book. But the quality of the room was different after that, and she noticed it, and she was careful not to look at it directly. The thing that broke the careful neutrality between them was not significant on its surface. It never is. She had been at the ranch 5 weeks when she began, quietly and without announcement, to take stock of the household supplies in a systematic way. What was ordered? What was wasted? Where the gaps were? It was the kind of work she'd done at the schoolhouse in Missouri, where the budget was always too small, and the only way to stretch it was to know exactly where every penny went. What she found was that the ranch was losing roughly $30 a month to inefficiency in the supply chain. Not through carelessness, but through habit. They'd been ordering the same quantities from the same places for years, without checking whether there were better arrangements available. She organized it into a single page of notes and brought it to Colt Dearing at his desk on a Tuesday afternoon. He read it without speaking, read it twice. Then he looked up. "You did this how?" he said. "I went through the supply ledgers back to 1897, she said. "The patterns are clear once you look at the whole picture." A pause. "That's 12 years of ledgers. The numbers aren't hard to read," she said. "They just take time." He looked at the page again. "If we shift the flour order to Billings directly instead of through the Bitter Creek store, that alone saves $8 a month. And the feed grain," she said. "If you coordinate with the Holt Ranch on timing, you can share a delivery cost. They're buying from the same supplier." He set the paper down on the desk. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man recalculating something he thought he'd already calculated correctly. "Did you run a household before?" he said. "I ran a school," she said, "on a budget that was never enough. You learn to look at where things go." He was quiet for a moment. "This is useful," he said. He said it the way he said everything. Direct, no ornamentation. But she understood by now that useful from Colt Dearing meant something closer to what most people would take 3 sentences to express. "I'll implement it when I put in the next order," she said. "Unless you'd like to review first." "Put it in," he said. "I trust your numbers." She left his office. In the hallway she stood for a moment and thought, "That's the first time he's trusted anything of mine." And then she told herself that was not the kind of thought she needed to be having, and went back to the kitchen. 6 weeks in, Teddy said to her, entirely without prelude, while she was rolling out pie crust and he was mending a bridle at the kitchen table. "He doesn't eat with the men usually. Did you know that?" She looked up. "He eats at the table every night." "He started 2 weeks ago," Teddy said, not looking up from the bridle. "Before that he ate in his study. Alone, same way he has for years." She said nothing. "Just thought you'd like to know," Teddy said, for no particular reason. She went back to the pie crust. Teddy went back to the bridle. June shifted in front of the fire. The evening she understood something had changed was a Thursday in late November. Colt had been out for 3 days, checking fence lines on the far north quarter, and had come back in a mood that sat on him like weather. She could tell before he said a word. It was in the way he moved across the yard, the set of his shoulders, the particular economy of a man who is holding something with both hands so it doesn't get loose. She did not ask. She made coffee and set it in front of him and sat down across the table with her own cup, and she waited. He drank the coffee. He was quiet for several minutes. Then he said without looking at her, "My father spent 30 years building this ranch. He died owing more on it than it was worth. I bought it back at auction. Spent 6 years paying off what was left of his debt before I had a dollar that was actually mine." Vera held her cup in both hands. "People around here remember him as a great man," Colt said. "I don't know what they mean by that, because what I remember is that he never once told me I did anything right, and I spent every year of my childhood trying to figure out why." She didn't say anything immediately. This was deliberate. She'd learned, without being taught it, that Colt Dearing needed space around a sentence before he could hear a response to it. "Did you figure it out?" she asked. He looked up from the coffee cup. "Eventually," he said. "A man who can't admit he's wrong can't see what's right in front of him. That was his whole life. I think he knew it and couldn't change it, and it made him mean." Vera looked at him. "Are you like him?" The question came out more directly than she'd intended. She saw him register it. "I used to think no," he said. "Lately I think it's more complicated than that." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up and was doing serious things against the eaves. "What changed it?" she said. "You're thinking about it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You corrected my numbers last week, on the feed order. I had the tonnage wrong, and you said so without making a thing of it." She didn't follow immediately. "Every person who's worked for me," he said carefully, "has been very careful not to tell me when I'm wrong. Because of what I built here, I suppose. Because of the reputation a man gets when he expects everything to be a certain way." A pause. "You didn't seem to know you were supposed to be careful about that." "I knew," she said. He looked at her. "Then why?" She considered this honestly. "Because wrong numbers cause real problems," she said, and the alternative, saying nothing, seemed like a worse version of careful. He turned his coffee cup his hands, once, twice. She had learned to recognize this, the sign of a mind running faster than the conversation. "My wife," he said, and then stopped. "Vera waited. She left 8 years ago. Before I'd paid off the debt, before any of this was what it is now." He said it without heat, without the soft coating people usually put on things they wanted you to handle with care. Just the plain fact of it. She said she hadn't understood what she was agreeing to, that the life here was harder than she'd expected, and I was less than she'd hoped. He set the cup down. "I don't think she was wrong on either count." Vera looked at him steadily. "What do you think she was wrong about?" she said. He met her eyes, and something in his face, the part under the careful habit of showing nothing, shifted slightly like ground after a hard rain. "That it wouldn't get better," he said. "That I wouldn't." The silence after that was a different kind from the usual one. She felt it, and she didn't touch it. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not for him, not exactly, for the shape of it. For what it had taken 8 years to say out loud." He nodded once. "So am I," he said. "Different reasons." He went to bed not long after. She sat in the kitchen alone with her coffee gone cold and June warm against her feet, and she pressed her hands flat on the table and told herself, very clearly, very deliberately, to be careful. She knew what it felt like to need someone, and she knew what it had cost her, and she was only 3 months from the far edge of that particular wreckage, and she could not afford to be careless with what was already a complicated situation. Her hands were perfectly steady. She noticed that specifically. What happened in December arrived from outside the ranch, as outside things tend to do. A man named Douglas Crane rode in on a Wednesday afternoon with a letter, and the particular smoothness of someone who had been sent to make a difficult thing sound simple. He introduced himself as a representative of a land and mineral interest based in Helena, and he had a document that he presented to Colt in the yard, with the careful manner of a man who knew exactly what was in it and had practiced not looking like he knew. Vera was coming from the kitchen garden, what was left of it in December, which was mostly root storage work, and she arrived at the edge of the yard in time to see Colt read the document. She saw his face do nothing. That was the tell. When Colt Dearing went entirely still, something was very wrong. The document, as she learned later that evening, when he spread it on the kitchen table, claimed a mineral rights interest in 40 acres of the ranch's northeast corner. Not land ownership, mineral rights, which was a narrower and in some ways more insidious claim. The area in question sat directly above the water table that fed 3 of the ranch's primary wells. It had been surveyed in 1888, before Colt's father had acquired the property, and there was an old deed of partition that someone had apparently gone looking for. "How old is this claim?" she asked. 18 years dormant, he said, which in Montana territory means it should have lapsed. But whoever found this is arguing the dormancy was improperly recorded. Who holds the interest? He looked at the document. A Helena syndicate. 3 investors. The representative of record is an attorney named Barlow. Vera looked at the map he'd unfolded beside the document. She'd spent enough time in this kitchen over the past months to read the ranch's geography without being told. The northeast corner. The wells. She saw it immediately. "If they establish that claim," she said, "they control your water." "Not all of it," he said. "Enough of it," she said. He was quiet. "Yes," he said. "Enough of it." She looked at the document again. Then she said, "Can I look at the original deed records from your father's acquisition and the 1888 survey?" He looked at her. "You know how to read land deeds. My father had a property dispute when I was 12, she said. I watched him lose it because he trusted the other party's lawyer to be honest about the documentation. I learned to read them myself after that. I was angry," she added, "and I needed somewhere to put it." Something moved across his face that she was beginning to recognize. The expression of a man being surprised by her in a way he found he didn't mind. "They're in the study," he said. "Top shelf, green file box." She went and got them. They spent 4 evenings at the kitchen table going through everything, the original deed, the survey records, the chain of mineral right assignments from 1888 forward. Colt was methodical. She was thorough in a different way, following threads he'd considered settled and pulling them until she was sure. On the 3rd evening, she found what she was looking for and sat up straight. "The 1888 survey," she said. He leaned across the table. "Look at the recorded date on the partition deed," she said. And then look at the survey marker reference in the original acquisition document from 1901. He looked. He was quiet for a moment. The partition uses a marker that didn't exist yet in 1888, he said. The Creek Bend marker was established in 1893, she said. I checked it against the county survey log, which means whoever drew up this partition deed used a reference point they couldn't have had access to. Colt sat back in his chair. He put both hands flat on the table. She'd learned to recognize this too, the gesture of a man reaching for precision, because the alternative was to break something. It was backdated, he said. At minimum, the reference was inserted later, she said, which means the document isn't what it's claimed to be. The kitchen was very still. How did you see that? He said. I was looking at what wasn't there, she said. You were looking at what was both matter. He looked at her across the table. The lamp was between them, and the light caught the side of her face, and she was aware of him looking in the particular way that she had been very careful not to be aware of for several weeks now. I need to get this to a land attorney in Helena, he said. Before the claim filing deadline, 30 days from the date on the document, she said. That's the 19th of January. I know a man in Helena, he said. Theodore Marsh. We came up together. I haven't spoken to him in years. You should speak to him tomorrow, she said. He looked at her. Are you going to tell me what to do on my own ranch? No, she said. I'm telling you what I would do if it were mine. A pause. Then something that was unambiguously, briefly, a real smile. Gone before she could be certain of it. I'll write to Marsh tonight, he said. He did. The letter went out with the Thursday writer. Marsh's reply came back in 6 days, and the news it contained was useful and complicated in equal measure. The backdated marker was recoverable, Marsh said, but the process would require a formal challenge filed in Helena, and Colt would need to be there in person. The syndicate's attorney, Barlow, was known to Marsh, and was not a man who abandoned a claim easily. This would take time, and it would cost money. He left for Helena on a Monday morning in early January, and she stood in the yard and watched him go. And she told herself the feeling in her chest was just the cold. She ran the ranch. This was not a small thing. She was not a rancher. She had never managed 8 working men through a Montana January, which was the date of month that clarified very quickly what a person was made of. But she had spent 4 months watching how this place worked, and she had Teddy, and she had the practical intelligence that had gotten her through harder things than a difficult winter. She handled the supply problem that came up on Wednesday, a delivery shortfall that would have left them short on feed grain, by remembering the arrangement she'd made with the Holt Ranch in November and calling in the standing agreement they'd set up. She handled a dispute between 2 of the hands about a work assignment by sitting them down at the kitchen table and asking each of them to explain their position until both of them talked themselves to the same conclusion. She kept the books. She kept the house. She kept the men fed, and the fires going, and the whole enormous machine of the place running, without losing a single day to disorder. Teddy told her on the 4th evening, with the delivery of a man stating a simple fact, he's going to come back and not recognize half of what you've done to make this better. I haven't changed anything that wasn't already his, she said. That's what I mean, Teddy said, and picked up his coffee. Colt was gone 9 days. He came back on a Wednesday, trail-worn and quiet in the particular way of a man who has been carrying something heavy in both hands for a week and is waiting for a safe place to set it down. He came through the kitchen door, and she put coffee in front of him and sat across from him without asking questions, and he told her. The challenge had been filed. Marsh was good and believed the case was strong, but the syndicate had resources. It would be 3 to 4 months before a ruling. In the meantime, the claim sat over the northeast corner like a cloud that wouldn't move. The ranch could operate, but there were things Colt couldn't do, couldn't make certain improvements, couldn't develop the area in question, without risk of complicating the legal position. And Barlow? She said. Marsh knows him, Colt said. He said Barlow wins by waiting. He counts on the other party running out of money or patience before the process runs its course. She looked at him steadily. Are you going to? Run out of money or patience? Either. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Once, twice. No, he said. Good, she said. Then we wait. He looked at her. She had said we without thinking about it. She saw him register it. She didn't walk it back. They were quiet for a moment. Then he said, How did it go here? Fine, she said. The feed grain situation is resolved. Birch has been managing the morning bar check without being asked, which is progress. June killed a rabbit and brought it inside, which was well-intentioned and needs to not happen again. Something happened on his face again. The near neighborhood of a smile. Closer this time. She does that, he said. I gathered. He looked at his coffee. Then, not quite looking at her. You needed someone too, she said. I know. I'm saying you didn't. Have to. She looked at him for a moment. He was still not quite looking at her, which was unusual. I know that, she said quietly. I did it because it was required. The kitchen was very still. That's different, he said. Yes, she said. It is. He looked up then and met her eyes, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not warm, exactly. Something more complicated and more honest than warm. The expression of a man who has been keeping very careful track of everything and has arrived at a number he wasn't expecting. Then Teddy knocked on the back door about the North Water Line, and the moment reorganized itself into something practical. But it was different after that. Something had settled. The way a room feels different after a window has been opened, even after the window is closed again. February was hard. The cold that came down off the mountains in the second week was the bone-deep kind, the kind that settled into the timbers of the house and wouldn't leave. 2 of the wells needed daily attention to keep from freezing through. The cattle needed closer management. There were 16-hour days that left everyone too tired for anything more than the essential. In that kind of cold and that kind of work, the extra layer of distance that people maintain in ordinary times falls away. There isn't the energy for it. You see people clearly when they're just trying to get through the day. What Vera saw was this. Colt Dearing was different from who she had thought he was at first, and different again from who she had thought he was a month ago. And she was learning that this was a quality that cut both ways. It meant there was more of him than he allowed people to see. It also meant she kept having to revise what she knew, which was an unsettling thing to keep doing about a person you were already being careful about. She noticed things. The way he checked on the youngest hand, Birch, every evening during the worst of the cold, without making it obvious he was doing it. The way he talked to the horses. The way he sat with a problem before he spoke about it, giving it the full weight of his attention, which was something she recognized because she did it herself. She noticed that he had stopped calling her Miss Ashton somewhere around the middle of January. He called her Vera now, and she called him Colt, and neither of them had made a decision about this that she could identify. It had simply become true. The letter from her brother arrived in the 3rd week of February, forwarded from her last address in Missouri, and it said what she'd been half expecting it to say for months. The house she'd left behind, her late husband's family's house, where she had been living before everything, had been sold. The proceeds had gone to her brother-in-law. There was nothing for her. Her brother wrote with the particular mix of sympathy and helplessness of someone who means well and cannot do anything. She read it twice. She burned it in the kitchen fire on a Thursday morning. The words stayed. She became quieter, just slightly. The kind of quiet that people who aren't paying close attention don't notice. Colt noticed. He noticed Friday when she gave shorter answers than usual. He noticed Saturday when she was up an hour before dawn, the light under her door visible when he went down for water. He noticed Sunday when she stayed in the kitchen later than normal, doing work that didn't urgently need doing, the way people stay busy when being still feels dangerous. He didn't ask immediately. He had learned her the same way she had learned him. Not through asking but through watching, through the accumulation of detail that adds up over months into something like understanding. He found her on Sunday afternoon in the barn, brushing her horse. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she heard him. Something happened, he said. It wasn't a question. She kept brushing. I got a letter. From who? My brother, about the house in Missouri. A pause. There's nothing left, not that I expected much, but when you see it in writing, it's different somehow. He came further into the barn. The house your husband's family had? Yes. She stopped brushing. She didn't turn around yet. I wasn't attached to it. I hadn't been attached to much of anything there for a long time. But it was still. She searched for it. It was the last piece. And now there's nothing that connects me to that life except the fact that I lived it. He stood quiet. She turned around. She was holding herself very carefully. He could see the effort of it, and he recognized it because he knew the same effort from the inside. Are you all right? He said. I don't know yet, she said. I think I will be. I just need a day. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, not quite looking at her, in the same careful way he said anything that cost him something, "For what it's worth, whatever you built here this winter, that belongs to you. Nobody's selling that out from under you." She looked at him. "I'm not saying," he started, then stopped. He was terrible at this, she knew. He was a man who had spent decades making himself hard to misread in matters of business, and nearly impossible to read in matters of anything else. "I'm saying the work you've done here is real, and it doesn't disappear, because someone else's house went to the wrong person." She looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was keeping something contained. "Thank you," she said, simply. She meant it simply. He nodded once. "Take your day," he said. "The ranch can manage one day." He left. She turned back to her horse, and she pressed her forehead lightly against the animal's neck, and she stayed like that for a moment, just breathing. The ruling came in April. A letter from Marsh, longer than usual, and Colt read it, standing in the yard in the early morning with Vera beside him. She had been on her way to the kitchen garden and stopped when she saw his face. He read it twice. He handed it to her. She read it. The mineral rights claim had been dismissed. The backdated marker had been sufficient evidence of fraud for the court to reject the partition deed entirely. The syndicate's attorney had filed for appeal, but Marsh's assessment was that it would not succeed. The northeast corner was clear. She looked up from the letter. He was watching her read it with the expression that had been showing up more and more frequently over the past weeks. The one she couldn't fully name but had stopped pretending she didn't recognize. "It's over," she said. "The legal part," he said. A pause. She understood what he meant. The rest of it had been building for 6 months, and they had both been very careful about it. And careful only goes so far. "The garden's coming in," she said. She had started a kitchen garden in March, clearing a patch on the south side of the house that got the best afternoon light. It was just green now, the first shoots, but it was real. He looked at it. "I know," he said. "I've been watching it." She looked at him. He was looking at the garden, but his face was doing something complicated, and she understood. In the way she had come to understand most things about him, which was sideways and then all at once, that he was not only talking about the garden. "Spring's still uncertain," she said carefully. "In Montana, fewer hard frosts than there were," he said. She turned back to the garden. Her hands were steady. Her heart was a separate matter. She didn't tell him, that first week of April, that she'd been offered a position. A letter had come from a schoolhouse in Billings looking for a teacher, forwarded through Bitter Creek. She hadn't replied to it. She hadn't decided why, not in so many words, and she was not a woman who made decisions she couldn't articulate, so she set the letter on her nightstand and let it sit there. She looked at it for 4 nights. On the 5th night, she took it downstairs and sat at the kitchen table with it and a cup of tea, and she was still sitting there when Colt came through the door from the direction of the barn, later than usual, and stopped when he saw her. "Late for you," he said. "Couldn't sleep," she said. He looked at the letter on the table. He looked at her. She watched him not ask. "It's a job offer," she said. "Schoolhouse in Billings. They need a teacher by September." He was very still. She knew that stillness now. She knew exactly what it meant. "Will you take it?" he said. She looked at the letter. She had been a teacher. She had been good at it. She had loved it, the particular work of helping a mind open, the patience of it, the slow satisfaction. Billings was not so far. She could build something there. She could build a life that looked like the one she'd planned before everything went sideways. "I don't know," she said. He sat down across from her. She hadn't expected that. "Vera," he said. He said it the way he said things that cost him something. Directly, without softening, because he had never learned how and she had stopped wanting him to. "I'm not good at this." "I know," she said. "I've been." He stopped, started again. "This winter. This whole winter, I have been trying to figure out when you were going to leave and how to make that easier when it happened." She looked at him. "Because that's what I know how to do," he said. "I know how to watch people go. I have been practiced at for a long time." "That's not something you should be practiced," she said quietly. "No," he said, "it's not." He put both hands flat on the table. She knew this gesture. It meant he was reaching for something true. "I would like you to stay. Not because of the accounts, or the kitchen, or any of the practical reasons which are real but aren't the ones I'm talking about." He looked at her steadily. "I would like you to stay, because this is different with you in it. I am different, and I notice that, and I didn't know what to do with it for a long time, and I still don't, but I know enough to ask you not to take the job in Billings." The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at the letter. She looked at him. "I have a condition," she said. "Name it. If I wake up some morning and I need something I haven't needed before," she said, "I need you to hear it, even if it's hard to hear. Even if I'm asking you to do something that doesn't come easy." "Yes." No hesitation. "And I need to stay myself," she said. "I came here with very little, but what I came with was mine. I need to keep that." "I know," he said. "I have watched you be yourself every single day since September. I would not change a thing about it." She pressed her lips together. She looked at the letter one more time. Then she picked it up, walked to the stove and dropped it in. She stood there for a moment, watching it catch. Then she turned around. "The garden's going to need another 12 feet cleared on the east side," she said, "if we're putting in a proper vegetable bed." Something broke open on his face. Not a smile, something bigger than a smile and quieter. "I'll have Teddy clear it by Saturday," he said. "I'll clear it myself," she said. "I know how I want it." "Of course you do," he said. She laughed. Sudden and genuine, the kind that came when something was so exactly right it couldn't be managed. He looked at her when she laughed, like she was something he had not expected to find and was still not entirely accustomed to. They were married in June, small and honest, in the yard of the ranch on a morning that was clear and warm and smelled like the kitchen garden coming into its first full season. Teddy stood with his good hat on. Birch wore a shirt that Vera had quietly mended 3 days prior without telling him. June sat at her feet throughout the ceremony with the grave propriety of a dog, taking the occasion seriously. When it was done, and the preacher had said what needed saying, Colt Dearing looked at Vera Ashton. Vera Dearing now, though she kept both names and he had not asked her not to, and he thought about a woman who had arrived with a single bag, and 3 warnings she hadn't listened to, and had spent one Montana winter doing what this place had needed for years without once asking to be thanked for it. He thought about a kitchen table and a survey map and a backdated marker in an old deed and a Thursday evening, when she'd said, "What's the point of careful if it lets the wrong thing happen?" He thought about a letter burning in a stove and a laugh in a quiet kitchen, and all the evenings in between that had added up, without either of them quite deciding they would, into something permanent. He took her hand. She held it, not tightly, not tentatively. The way she held everything, like it was hers, like she'd decided, like she was staying. By autumn the house was changed, not the walls or the rooms. The bones of it were the same broad timbers, the same long table, the same fireplace that had heated the place through more solitary winters than anyone had bothered counting. But the bones weren't what you noticed anymore. You noticed the garden on the south side, put up now for winter, the ground turned and resting, ready for next year. You noticed that the kitchen had curtains, plain cotton, nothing elaborate but there, and that the table in the main room had 2 chairs close together by the fire instead of one pulled back from everything. You noticed that Colt Dearing laughed sometimes, not often. Not the easy laugh of a man who has never had reason to protect it, but the real kind, the rare kind, the kind that came from somewhere genuine and arrived without warning. And when it happened, Teddy and Birch and every man on the ranch pretended not to notice, so that it would happen again. Years later, a new hand came on in the spring and heard the stories about the boss, the old ones, the ones about how he'd been before. Cold, closed off, turned away every woman who ever came near the place. He asked Birch about it, the way young men ask about things that have already been settled, looking for the shape of how change happens. Birch thought about it for a while, the way he'd learned to think about things that mattered. Then he said, "She didn't fix him. I want to be clear about that, because people get that wrong. She came here with nothing, and she worked, and she told him the truth, and she stayed when it would have been easier to go." "And that changed him?" the young man said. Birch shook his head. "He changed himself," he said. "She just made him believe it was worth doing." He picked up his tools and went back to work. And across the yard, through the kitchen window, there was a light on and a woman at the table, and the particular warmth of a house that has stopped being a place one person survives and become a place 2 people live. It had taken one winter. It had taken everything that winter asked of both of them, and it had been, as the garden beside the south wall would continue to prove each spring, coming up reliable and rooted and more abundant than the year before, more than enough.